Your concerns about data handling are creating friction with our growth objectives. That's what Brandon Mitchell told me during our quarterly alignment meeting on a Thursday morning in March 2017, sitting in the Frankfurt office conference room with his expensive Armani blazer and the casual confidence of someone who'd never actually had to fix a problem he'd created. Creating friction with growth objectives. I'd been data protection manager at Mitchell & Associates for 7 years, managing privacy compliance for enterprise software implementations across 12 EU countries, ensuring every customer database was properly secured, every data transfer was documented, and every piece of personal information was handled according to the complex regulations that govern privacy in Europe, regulations that could impose fines up to 4% of global revenue if violated. But according to Brandon, our new Vice President of European Operations who'd been promoted into the role 8 months earlier despite never working internationally, never managing EU teams, and whose primary qualification was sharing a last name with the company founder, my insistence on following data protection protocols was slowing down sales cycles and preventing him from hitting the aggressive targets he'd promised his father. I'm Madison Clark, and I sat in that meeting at Mitchell & Associates watching Brandon explain how we needed to move faster and stop overthinking compliance requirements, while European privacy law was about to undergo the biggest transformation in 20 years with enforcement penalties severe enough to destroy companies. 7 years, 3 months, and 11 days of ensuring customer data was handled legally, building privacy frameworks that protected both clients and the business, and Brandon had decided that data protection was regulatory theater that was getting in the way of his executive success story. I wasn't the VP who closed deals or set strategic direction. I drove a 2009 Volkswagen Golf with 156,000 kilometers on it and privacy regulation binders stacked in the back seat because I studied them during lunch breaks while most people scrolled Instagram. I lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Frankfurt's Norden district with a desk covered in GDPR implementation guides, data processing agreement templates, and regulatory updates from supervisory authorities across Europe because privacy law changes constantly and staying current requires reading dense legal documents rather than skimming LinkedIn posts about digital transformation. I was methodical, detail-oriented, technical about compliance frameworks, and apparently creating friction for a VP who thought data protection was about checking boxes rather than understanding the legal foundations that determine whether a business can operate in Europe or gets shut down by regulators. The trouble had started 8 months earlier when Mitchell & Associates promoted Brandon to Vice President of European Operations despite zero international experience. Brandon was 30 years old with a career trajectory that only happens when your father owns the company. Sales associate earning $75,000 when market rate was 42, promoted to senior sales manager despite bottom quartile performance, moved to director of client services despite never training for that role, and finally elevated to VP overseeing 127 employees and $31 million in annual revenue across offices in London, Frankfurt, Dublin, and Amsterdam. He spoke no foreign languages. He'd been to Europe twice, both vacations. But Thomas Mitchell wanted his son to run the company someday, and European operations seemed like a safe place to build executive credentials. Brandon's first video conference with European leadership lasted 14 minutes, 9 of them spent talking about his trip to Mykonos. When I mentioned that GDPR was taking effect in 16 months and would fundamentally change how we handled customer data, Brandon said, "Yeah, I've heard about that EU privacy thing. We'll deal with it when it gets closer," and move to the next topic. Sarah Chen, our London operations director, sent me a Slack message during the call that said simply, "We are so fucked." The General Data Protection Regulation had been passed on April 14, 2016, with enforcement beginning May 25, 2018. This wasn't a minor regulatory update, it was a complete transformation of privacy law with penalties up to €20 million or 4% of global annual revenue, whichever was higher. For us, 4% meant €3.4 million per violation. Every competent executive in Europe understood that GDPR was now the top business priority. Every competent executive except Brandon Mitchell, who attended one GDPR briefing, checked his phone through most of it, and concluded by saying, "This regulatory stuff is always overblown." I spent November and December 2016 preparing a comprehensive GDPR compliance assessment. We identified 23 databases needing updates, documented current practices that violated GDPR principles, and outlined necessary changes. The final roadmap was 47 pages with budget estimates totaling €400,000 over 16 months. I scheduled a presentation with Brandon for January 9, 2017. He joined 13 minutes late, lasted 19 minutes, then interrupted my explanation about privacy by design principles. Madison, I'm going to stop you there because this is way too detailed. Just send me a spreadsheet with all our European customers. Names, contact information, companies, contract values, everything. I want visibility into who we're working with so I can start building executive relationships. I explained that creating a centralized spreadsheet with comprehensive customer information would violate several GDPR principles we needed to be implementing: data minimization, purpose limitation, appropriate security measures. That concentrating sensitive information in a single easily shareable file was exactly what GDPR was designed to prevent. Brandon's response was that he was the vice president and needed to understand the business, and if the compliance team was going to make everything difficult with regulatory objections, then maybe we didn't understand what it took to drive growth. Klaus Weber, our technical director, tried supporting my position. Brandon, GDPR requires us to limit data collection and access to what's necessary for specific legitimate purposes. Creating a master customer list for general executive visibility isn't a legitimate purpose, and it creates security risks. Brandon looked annoyed. Klaus, I appreciate the compliance perspective, but I need to actually run this business. Just send me the spreadsheet by the end of the week. If there are security concerns, put a password on it or whatever. He hung up before we could respond. I sent Brandon a detailed email on January 11 explaining exactly why creating the requested spreadsheet would violate data protection principles and requesting he reconsider. Brandon's response from his iPhone at 11:52 p.m. Just do what I asked, stop making everything so complicated. I forwarded this to our general counsel. Legal counsel scheduled a call with Brandon to discuss GDPR compliance. Brandon missed the call, rescheduled twice, and finally had a 16-minute conversation where he told our lawyer the European team was being overly cautious. On January 18, 2017, after documenting our objections in writing, the Frankfurt IT department created the spreadsheet under direct orders from Brandon Mitchell. It contained 14,847 customer contact records, full names, emails, phone numbers, job titles, companies, service history, contract values, internal notes, email excerpts, and in some cases home addresses. This wasn't a basic customer list. This was a comprehensive database of personal information compiled into a single Excel file that violated multiple GDPR principles. The spreadsheet was uploaded to Mitchell & Associates' main Google Drive with access permissions that had never been properly audited. The file was shared with Brandon via a link set to anyone with the link can view, meaning anyone who obtained that URL could access 14,847 customer records without authentication. Sarah Chen saw the sharing settings and immediately emailed Brandon with the subject line, "Urgent, customer data security issue." Brandon responded, "It's fine, stop worrying so much," from his iPhone. Now about 78% of you think I'm about to describe deliberately leaking that spreadsheet to punish Brandon, and you're completely wrong. Subscribe right now, because what actually happens is that Brandon's negligence creates natural consequences through simple regulatory enforcement. No sabotage required, just an incompetent executive meeting European privacy law that doesn't care about excuses or family names. The spreadsheet sat on Google Drive with open sharing for 17 months while Brandon continued demonstrating why nepotism and executive authority are dangerous. In March 2017, he started forwarding customer emails to his personal Gmail so he could work from home more easily. These emails contained service complaints, technical discussions, contract negotiations, and personal information, all now sitting in Brandon's personal account without company oversight. I documented this in an email to HR explaining it violated both internal policy and GDPR requirements. HR responded about supporting Brandon's transition and allowing flexibility, corporate speak for "there's nothing we can do because he's the founder's son." In May 2017, Brandon was on a sales call with a Stuttgart manufacturing company. The IT director asked where their data would be stored and whether Mitchell & Associates could guarantee German data residency. Brandon, without checking with technical teams, promised, your data will definitely stay in Germany to meet your data sovereignty requirements. This was a complete lie. All our European customer data was stored on AWS servers in Virginia. When Klaus heard about this promise and explained we couldn't provide German-only storage, Brandon said, "They're not going to audit server locations, we just needed to close the deal." In August 2017, a former London employee named Rachel Morrison submitted a formal GDPR, right to be forgotten, request asking us to delete all her personal information. We had 30 days to comply. When Sarah asked Brandon about deleting Rachel's information from the spreadsheet, his response was, "Don't delete her from the spreadsheet. We might need her contact info later. Just tell her we've deleted everything. She won't know the difference." Brandon was explicitly ordering us to lie to a data subject about GDPR compliance. Sarah forwarded this to me with the subject line, "He's ordering us to lie about GDPR deletion." I escalated to our general counsel. Legal counsel called Brandon to explain the serious regulatory and legal risks of lying about data deletion. Brandon never called back. After 2 weeks of escalation battles that reached Thomas Mitchell, Rachel's data was eventually deleted, but only after I'd fought to prevent a VP from ordering fraudulent compliance. By November 2017, 6 months before GDPR enforcement would begin, I sent Thomas Mitchell a direct email explaining that European operations were not GDPR compliant, that Brandon had been ignoring compliance requirements for over a year, and that we faced serious regulatory risk. Thomas called me 2 days later. "Madison, Brandon tells me you've been resistant to his leadership. I need you to understand that Brandon is learning to manage complex international operations, and part of your role is supporting his development rather than escalating every disagreement." I realized then that no amount of documentation would matter in a family business where protecting the founder's son took absolute priority. May 25, 2018, arrived. GDPR took effect. Mitchell and Associates had no data protection officer appointed despite GDPR requiring one. We had no documented procedures, no privacy impact assessments, no breach notification protocol, no training program. We still had the spreadsheet on Google Drive with open link sharing. Brandon sent an all-staff email, "Congratulations team on all the hard work preparing for GDPR. Let's show European regulators that American innovation can thrive under any regulatory framework." I stared at my screen trying to understand if he genuinely believed we'd achieved compliance. On June 12, 2018, 18 days after GDPR took effect, Brandon received an email appearing to be from Google Security about suspicious activity requiring immediate verification. The email instructed him to click a link and re-enter his credentials. This was a phishing attack. Brandon clicked the link without hesitation, entered his username and password, and gave unknown attackers complete access to his Google Drive containing 37 files including the spreadsheet with 14,847 customer records. Brandon didn't notice the breach for 3 days. He didn't monitor audit logs because he didn't know they existed. On June 15, a Frankfurt customer named Heinrich Bauer received a phishing email impossibly specific to his company's relationship with Mitchell and Associates. It referenced his recent software upgrade, his contract renewal date, and a technical support issue from 2 weeks earlier. Heinrich immediately recognized this as a targeted attack using inside information. He forwarded it to Klaus with a simple question: "Did you guys have a data breach?" Klaus pulled Google Drive audit logs and within 90 minutes confirmed Brandon's account had been compromised on June 12 and the spreadsheet had been downloaded by attackers using IP addresses traced to Romania and Ukraine. We had a GDPR breach. Personal information of 14,847 individuals across 12 EU countries had been compromised. Under GDPR Article 33, we had 72 hours from discovery to notify supervisory authorities or face additional penalties. Klaus tried calling Brandon at 3:15 p.m. No answer. He sent urgent emails. No response. Brandon finally called at 8:30 p.m. Klaus briefed him on the breach timeline, the compromised data, and the 72-hour notification deadline. Brandon's first question was, "How bad is this?" Klaus explained the scope. Brandon's second question was, "Do we have to tell the regulators?" What if we just monitor the situation and see if it becomes a bigger problem? Klaus immediately called our general counsel. Legal counsel called Brandon that evening and spent 37 minutes explaining that GDPR breach notification was mandatory, that the 72-hour window was absolute, that attempting to hide a breach would result in penalties far worse than the breach itself, and that executives who participated in concealment could face personal criminal liability. Brandon's response was, "But how would regulators even know unless we tell them?" An emergency executive meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. on June 16. The meeting included Thomas Mitchell, Brandon, Klaus, myself, our head of IT, general counsel, and external privacy counsel. Klaus presented the timeline. Breach occurred June 12, discovered June 15, notification deadline expires June 18 at 2:30 p.m. Brandon tried to minimize, "This seems like an isolated incident. One customer got a suspicious email. Maybe we're overreacting." Our external privacy counsel cut him off. "Mr. Mitchell, this isn't ambiguous. Your Google Drive was accessed by unauthorized parties. A file containing 14,847 records was downloaded. That's a data breach under GDPR Article 4:12. The targeted phishing confirms attackers are using the stolen information. This triggers mandatory notification. There's no threshold where breaches become optional to report." Thomas Mitchell asked about penalties. Our lawyer provided the assessment. Under Article 83, penalties can reach €20 million or 4% of global annual revenue. The breach itself could result in significant fines. If you attempt to hide it and fail to notify within 72 hours, you're adding Article 33 violations on top of security violations, demonstrating willful disregard which regulators consider when setting penalties. Concealment would likely result in maximum penalties. Brandon spoke up. "But what if we just fix the security issue and handle this internally without making this a huge regulatory thing?" Our general counsel responded, "Brandon, what you're describing is attempting to conceal a breach you're legally required to report. That's not a business decision, that's considering a criminal act. I cannot and will not advise the company to violate notification requirements." Klaus jumped in. "If Mitchell and Associates attempts to hide this breach, I'm resigning immediately and reporting it to regulators myself as a whistleblower. I'm not participating in criminal concealment." I nodded. "Same. I've been warning about data protection failures for 18 months. I documented every violation. If this company attempts a cover-up, my documentation goes to regulators." Thomas Mitchell watched his son suggest criminal activity and his compliance staff threaten whistleblowing, and something shifted in his expression. "We're reporting the breach," Thomas said quietly. "File the notifications today. Brandon, you're not involved in the breach response. Klaus and Madison will handle regulatory communications." The notifications were submitted to the ICO and German regulator on June 16, approximately 53 hours after discovery. Within a week, ICO investigators requested comprehensive document production. I handed them a folder 4 inches thick, 18 months of documentation, every warning I'd sent Brandon, every compliance concern raised, every violation escalated that was ignored. The investigators spent 5 days on-site conducting interviews with 29 employees, reviewing hundreds of emails, examining technical security. The evidence was comprehensive. The spreadsheet was created in January 2017 at Brandon's direct order despite written objections. It remained accessible via open link sharing for 17 months while employees flagged this as dangerous. Brandon had been warned 14 times about specific GDPR violations through documented emails and meetings. He'd forwarded customer data to personal Gmail 47 times. He'd lied to customers about data residency. He'd ordered staff to falsely confirm data deletion. He'd dismissed every warning from qualified compliance personnel. He'd never completed data protection training, never read company policies, never attended GDPR compliance meetings. The ICO's preliminary findings in August 2018, this breach was entirely preventable and resulted from systematic failures at the executive level. Repeated warnings from qualified staff were ignored. Compliance requirements were dismissed as unnecessary expense. The evidence demonstrates willful disregard for data protection requirements by leadership. The German regulator was more pointed. Mr. Mitchell demonstrated a pattern of willful disregard that goes beyond negligence. Despite repeated warnings, despite clear legal obligations, despite available resources, Mr. Mitchell consistently chose convenience over compliance. This represents institutional failure enabled by nepotistic leadership placing an unqualified family member in a position where his incompetence created substantial harm. By September 2018, Mitchell and Associates faced regulatory investigations in the UK and Germany, a class action lawsuit from 847 German customers, individual lawsuits from 23 UK individuals, contract terminations from 34 clients, and shareholder derivative suits. Legal exposure exceeded €8 million. Third quarter revenue dropped 22%. The London office lost 12 employees in 8 weeks as talented staff left for companies where expertise was valued over family connections. On October 4, 2018, the board called an emergency meeting. The 5 outside directors made their position clear. Brandon had created an existential crisis through systematic negligence. His continued employment was indefensible. Thomas defended his son, arguing the breach was an unfortunate incident. Patricia Wong, a board member, cut through it. Thomas, your son ignored 18 months of warnings. He created a spreadsheet violating privacy principles over objections. He forwarded customer data to personal email 47 times. He lied to customers. He ordered false deletion compliance. He dismissed GDPR as theater. After the breach, he advocated criminal concealment. The only reason he's still employed is that he's your son. The vote was called. Should Brandon be terminated immediately? 5 directors voted yes. Thomas and his college roommate voted no. Motion carried 5-2. Brandon was terminated October 5, 2018. Thomas submitted his resignation as CEO that same day. But the story wasn't over. The board asked me to take on expanded responsibilities as acting director of data protection, reporting directly to the board. I had leverage. They needed my expertise. Regulators trusted me. I negotiated. Salary increased from €68,000 to €115,000, a €40,000 retention bonus, and explicit veto authority over executive decisions creating privacy risks. For 7 months, I worked with ICO investigators and German regulators, implementing comprehensive privacy impact assessments, GDPR training, rewriting data processing procedures, and implementing security controls. In March 2019, the ICO issued their final determination. Mitchell and Associates was fined £2.1 million, approximately €2.4 million, for security failures and systematic disregard for compliance. In April 2019, the German regulator fined €1.8 million. Combined regulatory fines, €4.2 million. Legal settlements, €2.7 million. Legal fees, €1.3 million. Lost revenue from client departures, approximately €6.8 million. Total cost of Brandon's negligence, over €15 million, nearly 40% of annual revenue, transforming a profitable year into catastrophic loss. The business never recovered. Clients continued leaving. Employees kept departing. In December 2019, Mitchell and Associates was acquired for approximately 40% of pre-disaster valuation. The acquisition agreement prohibited using the Mitchell name. Thomas retired at 61, 5 years early, his dream of passing the business to his son destroyed. I left in April 2019, taking a position as privacy director at Secure Data Solutions. My salary increased to €147,000, a 42% increase. More importantly, I work for executives who understand privacy compliance isn't friction, it's the legal foundation allowing companies to operate in Europe without getting destroyed by regulators who don't care about family names. Brandon Mitchell's LinkedIn profile lists him as independent consultant, business strategy and digital transformation, with no clients, no posts since 2019, and no login activity for 11 months. Industry colleagues report he's essentially unemployable in any role involving data management, European operations, privacy compliance, or executive leadership. One recruiter told a trade publication, Brandon's name comes up in every data protection training as the definitive cautionary tale. He destroyed a €40 million company through systematic negligence. He's famous for destroying his father's legacy. Nobody wants that near their organization. The spreadsheet that destroyed his career is now used in GDPR compliance courses across Europe. Privacy consultants use it in training titled, How Executive Negligence Creates Regulatory Disasters. Business schools use it in case studies about governance failures. 1 year after leaving, in April 2020, I attended a data privacy conference in Amsterdam. I saw Brandon across the hall wearing an expensive suit, carrying a briefcase, working the room, approaching people, handing out business cards, trying to network into consulting opportunities. His badge showed only his name with no company affiliation. He saw me and approached. Madison, good to see you. I heard you landed at Secure Data Solutions. Privacy Director, that's a great title. I looked at him. The role reflects what data protection expertise is actually worth when you work for executives who understand compliance matters. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, that whole GDPR situation at Mitchell was really unfortunate. Bad timing with the breach happening right after the regulation took effect. Just unlucky circumstances. Brandon, it wasn't bad timing or unlucky circumstances. You were warned 14 times about specific violations. You created the spreadsheet despite being told it violated principles. You used personal email for customer data. You lied about data residency. You ordered false deletion compliance. You ignored a 47-page compliance plan because you thought privacy law was theater. You never completed training, never read policies, never consulted privacy counsel. The breach was inevitable because you treated data protection as optional, and the €15 million in total costs was exactly what happens when incompetent executives ignore qualified staff and assume family connections will protect them from consequences. Brandon didn't have a response. He made an excuse about needing to attend a session and walked away. I watched him disappear into the conference crowd, another unemployed consultant at a privacy conference full of actual qualified professionals who understood the regulations he'd spent 18 months dismissing as unnecessary theater. Thanks for staying through this entire story, everyone who's ever worked under an executive whose primary qualification was their last name rather than their competence, who've watched nepotism override expertise and wondered what it would take for accountability to finally happen. If this resonated with you, if you've ever seen unqualified family members promoted into positions where their incompetence created serious problems while qualified staff were ignored, subscribe and share your story. These workplace tales remind us that some consequences are too expensive even for family connections to absorb, that regulations with serious enforcement mechanisms can accomplish what internal politics never will, and that expertise matters regardless of whose name is on the building or whose family connections have protected them from accountability their entire career.